New motorists will now have to learn how to drive on motorways before taking their test under new plans. The £2 million scheme to improve road safety will see them having to take a motorway driving lesson with an approved instructor in a dual-controlled car. Other measures aimed at reducing deaths will see learner motorcyclists facing strengthening of compulsory basic training. While for cyclists, there will be a government consultation on changes to improve cycling safety. Well, Laura Laker is a journalist and cycling campaigner. She's joining us now in our studio. Good morning to you, Laura. Let's start by looking at cyclists in terms of road safety. What more do you think that can be done? Sadly, we do a lot of stories on here that end with cyclists in tragic circumstances coming into tangles with cars.
Yeah, so what's being announced today is £50 million for bikeability training over 4 years. And bikeability training is training for children in schools and teaching them how to first of all control the bike and then ride safely on the road, which is fantastic news, but it can't come on its own because when children learn to cycle, that's great, but then their parents are too afraid to let them ride on the roads because the infrastructure isn't there. So what we need to start looking at in this country is sort of changing the way that we use our roads and building infrastructure so that people of any age can ride safely and parents are happy for their children to ride on the roads and people to ride to work.
I did actually see a bunch of boys cycling yesterday, and they'd obviously done their bikeability training. They were that kind of age and they were having a great time. There's kind of a whole pack of them. But I did pass them in my car and wonder if I would be happy with my kids going out on bikes at that age. I mean, I think it's one thing when they're at sort of secondary school, but before that, you almost fear for them really on the roads.
Yeah, I mean, cycling is such a wonderful way of travelling. Kids love doing it. They're super keen to get out on the roads and ride their bikes. But I think that is an issue, and the roads are actually safe. It's safe to cycle. It's as safe as being a pedestrian. But the thing is, it doesn't feel safe, and that's the sort of issue we have to deal with in this country.
Do you think drivers need a bit more help in helping cyclists in terms of, we're talking about the fact that drivers are now going to have motorway lessons before they take their actual driving test? It's going to be compulsory. In terms of learning how to drive around cyclists, do you think that should be introduced?
I think that would be a fantastic idea. I think at the moment a lot of people don't cycle and so they don't really understand sort of how it feels to be a cyclist on the road and just how much room you need to give a cycle. So you're supposed to give, the highway code says you're supposed to give a bicycle as much room as you would give a car, but most people don't realise that and they might pass you too closely. It happens to me and it can be quite intimidating, and I think that sort of thing puts people off and puts people off letting their parents on their children on the road.
The thing that terrifies me about cyclists, you don't see it all the time, but we did have some footage last week on Sunrise of a cyclist driving into a moving train.
Yeah, he jumped a red light, didn't he?
I think often if cyclists are wearing headphones, they are very unaware on the road. I mean, what is the safety ruling on wearing headphones and cycling? Because I've actually seen a lot of people put themselves in a very dangerous position.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, people do silly things. People in cars do silly things. People walking do silly things. People on bikes do silly things. And obviously, it's everyone's responsibility to keep themselves safe to an extent. But then the difference between sort of driving dangerously and cycling dangerously is that there's a lot more at stake if you drive dangerously. You've got a sort of ton or more of metal around you. And so the potential for causing other people harm is much greater than if you're just riding a bicycle.
It often gets mooted whenever we talk about this kind of thing on the programme. A lot of people get in touch with Twitter and say there should be some kind of licence, particularly if you're cycling in cities, to use, say, one of the London Boris bikes, as they're called, or your own bicycle on the road. There needs to be some kind of licence, as you would have with a motorcycle or a car, because a lot of the responsibility of safety on the road does come down to the cyclist. Yet, if there's an accident, they won't be held liable, the motorists will.
Well, it's an interesting point, but it's one that would be impossible to do in reality because it would be so expensive. People change bikes all the time. I mean, what age would you start doing that? Children ride bikes from, you can start riding from a very young age. Would you ask children to be licensed? I think cycling has so many benefits. It's healthy, it's safe, it's good for the environment. We've got huge problems with air pollution in this country. It kills maybe 60,000 people a year in this country, and so I think it's important that we encourage people to cycle and do all that we can. And in countries where there's more cycling, and where people feel safer on the roads. The onus is on the larger vehicle or the faster vehicle to protect those in smaller vehicles or the more vulnerable on the road, because they have the most to lose. People on foot, people on bikes have the most to lose, and I think it should be the responsibility of those in the larger, faster vehicles to protect those who they could harm.
Okay, Laura, interesting to speak to you. Laura Laker,
Thank you.
Journalist and cycling campaigner. Thank you very much. Jackie, cycling was represented at Sports Personality of the Year, but
It was.
tennis won.
Yes, Rumi didn't win.